Good morning, everybody. My name is Ben Huckey. I work for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. I've been with the state in some aspect or another since 2006 when I started as a contractor working on stream designations. In 2012, I came to the DNR as an actual DNR employee in the NPDES section as a permit writer. And then for the last 8 years, I've been serving as the coordinator for the municipal permits for the NPDES section. I was asked to give a presentation this morning, kind of breaking down the entire permitting process from you guys completing an application to submitting that to the department to then us reviewing that and issuing a permit renewal. Here's a very high level agenda of what I'm going to discuss in this presentation. I'll talk about the application timelines so you know when your application is due, depending on what the scenario of your facility may be. After that, and what will be the bulk of the presentation, I'll discuss the NPDES application forms. I'll go into each form that's required for municipal or semi-public facilities, and I will put some focus on the areas that are most commonly done wrong or create the most confusion. After that, we'll talk about application submission, so you know where you've got to submit that form when it's complete. Then we'll discuss the NPDES renewal process. You guys will know what happens from the time you submit your application until the time you receive that renewal permit. I'll also go into what our permitting priorities are and what delays we may encounter while trying to issue a renewal permit. And then to end the presentation, I'll talk about compliance schedules. It's a little off topic when you're talking about application forms and permit renewals. But I like to take any opportunity that I'm speaking with consultants or operators to bring up compliance schedules. So first up is the permit application timelines. It is actually in the Iowa Administrative Code, the length of time in which you must apply for a new or renewed NPDES permit. So for a new permit, you need to submit your application 180 days prior to an anticipated discharge. And this will come up whenever you're constructing that new facility. You'll be required in that construction process to submit that application. For a permit renewal, which makes up the bulk of the applications that we receive in any given year, is 180 days prior to the expiration date. That exact date can be found on the cover page of your permit. And we do send out renewal or reminder packages when it comes time for you to submit that renewal. So you should receive a letter with an application invoice and a notice of which forms you must submit approximately 8 months in advance if you're continuously discharging minor, about a year in advance for majors, and a year plus, year to year and a half if you're a controlled discharge lagoon. The reason for those timelines is because several of these forms do require that you submit additional monitoring data, so that is planned out to give you enough time to collect those samples and get your results. If you are upgrading an existing facility, again, during the construction permitting process, you will be required to submit an updated application. It's typically following the facility plan approval. The reason for that is typically at that point, you shouldn't have any changes really that are going to affect what you would put in your application. For administratively continued permits, I wrote down there upon request, and what I mean by that is there are permits out there that have been expired for 8, 9, 10 years due to various reasons, the most common one being stream designation review, which I'll talk about later on in the presentation. But when we get to renewing those permits, some of the data that's in them may be so old or outdated that we would request that you submit an updated NPDES application. Or if your facility is under new ownership, this comes into play the most time for mobile home parks or hotels, things like that. You're required to notify the department in writing within 30 days of the transfer of ownership. A lot of times if people call me and ask how to do that, I will tell them to submit the first page of the application, which we'll go over here in a little bit, which has most of the contact information and ownership information included. Now you all know when an application must be submitted, but what happens if that application is late? This slide outlines the DNR's response for dealing with late applications, and this is primarily dealing with renewal applications. So you already have an existing NPDES permit, and on the front page of that permit has that date stamped on there by when you must submit your renewal application. So within 30 days of missing that date, you receive a phone call from the department reminding you of the application materials and will give you an end of the month due date. That phone call will come during the first week of the month, so you'll have the better part of 3 weeks to get those application materials rounded up and submitted. If you miss that end of the month due date, you would receive a written NOV that would again outline what must be submitted and give yet another due date. If that due date from the NOV is missed, then the facility would be referred to our legal department, in which case they would take steps to start a consent order. That order would include a monetary fine and another due date. And if that due date is missed, the referral process starts over again. So on and so forth until you get that application in. You must submit an application prior to the permit expiration date to maintain an active permit. Your application submitted to the department is what continues your permit past the expiration date. If you don't have an application submitted and your permit hits the expiration date, then following that, you no longer have a permit to discharge and it would be considered an illegal discharge. It also becomes much more difficult to renew that permit because we now must treat that facility as a new facility instead of an existing one. So it brings in anti-deg requirements and make sure your facility is completely able to meet all water quality and technology-based limits, and it becomes much more difficult. Now you know the scenarios and timelines when an application for an NPDES permit must be submitted. We'll start talking about the actual forms. This slide shows a list of resources which you should gather up that will help you complete your forms. The existing NPDES permit will have information like the outfall number and description, and also some design information. Previous renewal applications would be a great help if your facility has not changed in the last 5 years. Our application forms do change a little, so you'll still have to go through each question and submit a new application, but a lot of that information will be on your old forms. If you've done an upgrade since your last permit was issued, or if this is for a new facility, you'll need construction design and permitting information. Several of our forms have requirements to submit monitoring results, so you'll want your laboratory result sheets. A most recent DNR EPA inspection report will help you out with the questions if those reports noted any deficiencies in your facility. And also on online maps, such as Google Maps is what I always use, will help you get those location descriptions for outfalls in facilities and things like that. Here's the list of all of our application forms. I have it broken up depending on type of facility. If you operate a minor facility, then you would need to submit parts A, D, and F. And a minor facility is one with an average wet weather design flow of less than 1 MGD. If you operate a major facility, so you have an average wet weather design flow of 1 MGD or greater, then you have several more forms to fill out there. And we'll go over each form individually. The highlighted forms are the ones that do have additional monitoring requirements included. So those are the ones that as soon as you get your reminder packet from the DNR, you'll want to get those opened up to find out which parameters you need to sample for so you can contact your lab and get that scheduled. And then Part E, I have an asterisk by that because you are only required to submit Part E if you have combined sewer. So if your stormwater and your sanitary sewer systems are combined, we only have 9 communities in the state that need to submit that form. And all of our forms do have instructions at the end. So if you get confused on any part, then please read through the instructions and see if that helps you out before you contact your permit writer. That might help save some phone calls. Now we're going to start diving into the actual application forms. This is Form 30 Part A, the basic applicant information. It is a form required for all applicants, and I am going to go through this application form question by question because it is the one where I receive the bulk of the phone calls and confusion. So questions number 1 and 2 are pretty simple. It's your facility information and your applicant information. The only things I'd really want to point out here is the facility address, physical location. if your lagoon system or your treatment plant doesn't have an actual address, like a mailing address, that box you may put in something like just a description, like it's the northwest corner of First and Main Street or something like that. So that is the physical location of the treatment plant. And then down below, that would be different if if they don't have that mailing address, then that's where you would put City Hall or wherever you want your mail to go. And the bottom one's the applicant or owner name and information. That one's pretty straightforward. Question number 3 is asking about if you have an affidavit or contract operator. If you check no to that box, if you don't have one, then that's all you need to do for question 3, and then you can move on to number 4. If you check yes, then we'd want the name, address, telephone number of that individual, as well as a description of what their responsibilities are. Question number 4 is about if you have any other environmental permits, such as stormwater, air, solid waste permits. You would record that information there. Question number 5 is asking about combined sewer overflows. I had mentioned this briefly looking at the slide that had all the forms on it. Majority of our permittees will check no to that box. We should only have 9 that check yes. If you check no, you move on to number 6. If you check yes, then you'd have to fill out that little part below that's asking about what percentage of your sewer system is combined. Number 6 is asking about inflow and infiltration. If you've had your last inspection report noted that you had excessive INI, you check yes or no, and then if yes, you would explain what steps are underway. Most, if not all, inspection forms that I have seen will have a line at the end that's recommended that says continue with identification and removal of INI. I wouldn't count that as excessive. It's more you would check yes there if the field office is actually taking steps to ensure you're proceeding with INI reductions. Question number 7 is asking about areas served by your facility but are outside of your corporate city limits. So you would fill this out if you provide service for another nearby community or say a rural subdivision or rural mobile home park, areas outside of your corporate limits but are still served by your wastewater treatment plant would be recorded here. Number 8 is starting to get into specifics about your actual wastewater treatment plant. So 8A is asking for the description of the facility and its treatment components. It does say that you need to mark the process units. It gives an example of anaerobic digesters or aeration basins. This was more important when we used to include operational monitoring in permits. We no longer do that. So it's not as important for a permit writer, but it is still important for the field offices to know that information. And then B is asking for latitude, longitude coordinates of the facility, as well as your section, township, range, and county. This is information that you can find on an online mapping program, and I'll discuss how to use that. I created this slide to help those that don't know how to find coordinates using an online mapping program. So like I said, I use Google Maps primarily. So these are a couple screenshots off of Google Maps. If you've got aerial photography up, you can click on your wastewater treatment plant and it will pop up a box like this top one here. It says Mitchell County, Iowa, and then it gives coordinates in decimal degrees. Well, our application asks for coordinates in degrees, minutes, and seconds. So now what you do is if you click on the decimal degrees there, it will pop up another box on the left-hand side of the screen, and it will give you this format that you see below that will be in the degrees, minutes, and seconds. Okay, back to the form. Question number 9 is about your facility design information. This can be found either in construction permitting documents, or if nothing has changed since your last permit was issued, this should be found on the design information page of your NPDES permit. Number 10 is asking about if you have any scheduled improvements. And this would be not just improvements that are required because of a permit or an order. This is anything you've got planned coming up that may change your treatment plant. And I cut a lot of question 10 off that's down below it. It asks for more implementation schedules, and details on whatever improvements that you may have coming up in the near future. Question number 11 is one that we see incorrect information on quite frequently. It's asking about your discharges to surface waters. So for 11A, it's your discharge of treated effluent. Everybody should have at least one of these if you're applying for an NPDES permit. That's your primary outfall. B is sanitary sewer overflows. These would be bypass areas located within your collection system. So this is prior to wastewater reaching your wastewater treatment plant. The most common would be lift station overflows, or if you have a satellite EQ basin, if you've got an overflow from that EQ basin, that's where you'd want to mark that down. And these are designed overflow locations. I'm not talking about you had a manhole blow off once or you had a basement backup. This is areas in your treatment system that were designed to overflow in emergency cases. C is internal discharges of untreated or partially treated effluent. So this would be after it's reached your headworks. This would be if you've got an EQ basin on site that's got a bypass location, or any of your treatment units have an emergency overflow or bypass where all of the wastewater is not treated, but the wastewater leaves your system and goes to the receiving stream. D is for combined sewer overflows. So like I mentioned before, there's only 9 communities in the state that should mark yes or mark a number on this one. Otherwise, this should be zeros for everybody. And internal bypasses of any treatment units. These are ones that are do not discharge to a surface water. They just route around a treatment unit and maybe tie into another treatment unit further downstream in the treatment process. Question number 12 is a big one. It's split onto 2 different slides. It's asking about wastewater or solids disposal not listed in question number 11. So if you do generate sewage sludge on a regular occasion, you would mark yes there. Does a facility discharge treated effluent to basins, ponds, or other surface impoundments that do not have outlets? This is pretty rare for anybody to mark yes on. We have a couple occasions where they have a secondary outfall that goes to a quarry that doesn't have an outlet. You would mark this information there. B is asking about land application or effluent reuse as far as being land applied, such as the most common occurrence we have in Iowa is using the effluent to irrigate a golf course. This is where you put that. C, does the facility discharge or transport treated wastewater to another treatment works? That's very rare. I don't know that I've ever seen that one marked as yes, and can't even give an example on when that might happen. 12D is asking if you discharge or dispose of wastewater not in a manner included in 12A through 12C. It gives a few options there. The most common one we have listed here is we have a few facilities with a nearby industry that use effluent as cooling water. So this is where you'd put that information. And does the facility generate sewage sludge or derive a material from sewage sludge? This one is commonly checked as yes, and then it asks for more information about your sludge program below. Question 13 is information that's required to be included in maps. When you receive your reminder package from the DNR, we will have supplied a blank map for you. It's just an aerial photograph of your facility. You can use that if you choose to. You can print it off, mark this information on there, and send it back. Just make sure that if you do use that option, that when you rescan your map, that everything is legible. We do get that quite often where people will print that page off, they'll use a black pen or black marker, and then when the scan comes through, we can't read any of it, so we have to ask for you to redo it. Some of the most important information that you can provide in your maps is your outfall locations. Clearly mark those because that is what all of your limits and monitoring are based off of that location. So make sure that is accurate. Question 14 is similar to the maps, but it's asking for flow diagrams or schematics of your wastewater treatment plant. So mark all your process units, the path through the facility. If you have schematics drawn up from your construction process. You can use those to submit those here. The most important information that we do need is where you have sampling locations and flow monitoring devices or capabilities. Your permit will establish flow monitoring locations, and we'll use this schematic to determine where those locations need to be. Now we're getting into questions about the outfalls, more specific information. Questions 15, 16, and 17 will need to be completed for each outfall location. So you will need to print that page off of the permit for each outfall that you have and fill it out. So outfall number and the outfall description you'll be able to find in your NPDES permit. It'll be on the second page of your permit. Your outfall type, if known, you can put sanitary waste for your primary outfall. If you've got SSOs or CSOs, you can mark down what type of outfall it is. And then your location, here's another area where you can use your Google Maps, get that latitude and longitude coordinates. Your county, city, state zip, that's all easy. If you don't have the section township range, that's not near as important as the latitude and longitude. As long as I've got those coordinates, I can find exactly where that outfall is. Question 16 is the receiving waters for that outfall. This information you can also find in your NPDES permit, and it will include the designation. If this is for a new facility, your construction application or your construction permitting documents will have to have had a waste load allocation. You can get this information out of the waste load. Question number 17 is specific to each outfall you're filling out. What levels of treatment, if any, does this outfall have? Does it have disinfection? Does it have post-aeration? Those are pretty self-explanatory. Questions 18 and 19 include the required testing. Question 18 is required for everybody, regardless of size or treatment plant, and you are required to submit an effluent result for all three of those. One of the common mistakes we see is that if a permittee does not have chloride or sulfate as part of their regular sampling, they'll put Na down because they don't think they need to include a sample result. That's not true. You must include a sample result for all of these. Testing is required for each active outfall. So if you have multiple outfalls, you would need to provide this for each one. Now, after saying that, if it's all the same wastewater, so say you have a couple outfall options where you can divert all of your flow to one location or another, but it's the same wastewater, please don't fill out this form for each outfall and just copy the same data down. Just where it says outfall number, include all the outfalls that this data pertains to. And this is for active outfalls, so not emergencies. You don't need to submit this data for overflow or bypass location or a CSO outfall. This is just for your normal active outfalls. Question 19 includes additional monitoring requirements. This is only required for facilities with an average wet weather design flow of greater than or equal to 0.1 million gallons per day or 100,000 gallons per day. If you fall below that threshold, you only need to submit question 18. If you fall above that threshold, you have to submit both. Similar to question 18, a sample result must be submitted for all of these, except for you maybe see the asterisk by total residual chlorine. If you do not use chlorine at your facility, you do not need to provide a sample result for TRC. Otherwise, it doesn't matter if this is part of your normal sampling routine or not, you must submit a sample result for this. And a question we do commonly get for questions 18 and 19 is maybe you didn't see these questions, but your application's due next week. What do you do because you haven't had time to do these? The most important thing is get your application in on time. Write a note on questions 18 and 19 or whichever samples you're missing, letting us know when those samples will be taken and when we should see results. It happens more frequently than you might imagine, especially for question 18 and CBLs recently. Our controlled discharge lagoons, several of them haven't discharged for the last couple of years because we've been in drought. So if that's the case, just note in there that you acknowledge that you have to do this. You will collect your samples at your next drawdown and you'll submit them when you can. Please do not do a special drawdown just to collect these samples. If you do not need to draw down, just hold until you need to. And that was it for part A. I'm going to go over the next application forms quite a bit quicker than Part A. They're not as in depth. You don't need as much information. So Part B is required for majors. So if you've got that average wet weather design flow of 1.0 million gallons per day or greater, you need to submit Part B. It is the extensive or the expanded effluent testing. It includes 101 parameters, and you must sample for each one 3 times. Samples must be less than 4 years old, and at least 2 of the samples must have been taken no fewer than 4 months and no more than 8 months apart. So there is quite a bit of planning that needs to be done in order to get these samples done before you need to get your application submitted, which is why majors get their permit application reminders a year in advance. Well, we moved Part B to an Excel spreadsheet, and that way you enter in each individual data set, and then the spreadsheet does the calculations for you as far as averages and max, because that was something we used to see a lot of errors on with those calculations. So now the spreadsheet does it for you. The spreadsheet has 3 tabs. The first tab is your instructions. The second tab is the data entry, which is the page that you fill out. And then the third tab is the DNR use only tab, which does the calculations for us. It's optional, but I would request that you also submit your lab reports as part of your application packet. It's pretty common for a permit writer to be going through Part B and have questions about some of the data. If you include the lab reports, that will save us a phone call, and it will save you having to email it to us upon request in the future. So if you just include those, then if we have questions, then chances are we can answer them ourselves if those lab reports are included. This is a screenshot of that Part B Excel spreadsheet. This is of the data entry tab, the tab that the consultants or the operators would fill out. It's pretty simple. You've got your facility name and your outflow number, and then you do enter in the flows for the days that each sample was collected. So you've got your flow 1, 2, 3 there across the top. That will automatically then calculate the masses for you, so you don't have to calculate or enter that information. So the only thing you have to do is take the concentrations off your lab sheets and fill that in the concentration column for each scan, and then the masses will populate, and then you do need to fill out the units, if that's milligrams per liter, micrograms per liter, etc. And then on the far right, there's the all scans column that will ask for the test method and the detection level and that information will also be found on your lab forms. And much like questions 18 and 19, if you can't get this done before your due date, please get your application in on time. If you've only got 2 scans done, fill out scans 1 and 2, leave a note that says scan 3 is being collected, whatever, 2 months from now, and we'll get you your results in 3 months, or whatever the case may be. Just leave a note so we know that you know that it's blank, and then we won't hound you for that extra information. So moving on to Part C of the application is the toxicity testing data form. This is primarily just for major facilities. They're required by the permit to take a whole effluent toxicity test once annually for the water flea and for the fathead minnow. If you were, for some reason, a minor facility and required to take a toxicity test, then you would be required to also fill this form out and submit it with your application. That hasn't happened since I've been in this role, so this is primarily just for major facilities. So question number 10 is asking how many required tests did you have? So if you're an existing facility, you would have done 4 in the past 4 years, so you put 4 for acute. We do not require chronic tests in Iowa, so that should be zeros for everybody. Number 2, summary of submitted test information. That's asking about, have you submitted the data to the DNR already? If yes, what are the dates that you submitted it, and what was the summary of that result? So that should just say pass or fail in the dates. Number 3 is the toxicity reduction evaluation question. You'd only have had to do this if you got into some wet test failures. Then you may have had to do a TRE, but in most cases this is a no. If it is a yes, then you would check yes, and then you would explain the details of that TRE. The rest of Part C is only required if you haven't submitted your individual test data to the DNR. Your NPDES permit does require that following each test, you submit a form that's got your test data on it along with your monthly report. So For the most part, questions 4 and beyond in Part C are left blank from everybody because they've already submitted that information. If you do need to fill that out and have questions on it, you can reach out to me or whoever your permit writer is. Form 30 Part D is the industrial user discharges form of the application. I don't receive a whole lot of questions on this form. If you have industrial users in your community, chances are you've been working with the department over the years and getting those industrial users on treatment agreements, or maybe you have a pre-treatment program and you've been in contact with me over the years asking questions about that. So if it pertains to you, chances are you've got the information readily available and you're familiar with it. And if it doesn't pertain to you, then this is a really simple form to fill out. So it is required for all permittees. So you just have your facility name and your permit number on the top. Number 1 is, do you have a pre-treatment program? We only have 20 communities in the state that would check yes to this. Otherwise, the majority of permittees will check no. If you do have a pre-treatment program, then that date that it is asking for can be found in your NPDES permit. It's on a page towards the back. It's the pre-treatment program page of your permit. Number 2 is asking about the number of industrial user dischargers you have. So you would write down the number of non-categoricals and number of categorical industrial users and then the total. And if that is all zeros, then you would jump down to question number 6. If you have entered any numbers into these and you do not have a pre-treatment program, then you'll need to go to questions 3, 4, and 5. If you have a pre-treatment program, then you can also skip to question number 6. So as I just mentioned, questions 3, 4, and 5 are only for communities who have industrial users and who do not have a pre-treatment program. And you would need to fill these questions out for each of your industrial users. The name of the SIU, and then question number 4 is asking about what limits apply, and then question number 5 is asking, has this industrial user caused you any problems? If so, then what? In the bold writing under question number 3, you will also see that it says provide a copy of the current treatment agreement. This is very important. In most cases, we have it on file, but there are several occurrences where the city and industry have executed a new treatment agreement but never submitted it to the department for review. So we don't even recognize that it exists, and we will still regulate that industry based on an old, outdated treatment agreement. So please make sure that you provide that copy of the new treatment agreement with your permit application. So question number 6 of Part D is asking about hazardous waste. All of the applicants must complete question number 6. It's very rare that these are ever marked as yes. In fact, I can't think of a single time when it has been. It's asking if you receive hazardous waste, and if so, provide more information. And Part D also has additional monitoring requirements. These sample results are only required for minor facilities that have industrial users. If you are a major facility with an industrial user, this information is already covered as part of Part B. And if you are a minor facility with no industrial users, you do not need to do this. So the most common mistake I see with these sample results is that the permittee will provide data for the industry, and that's not what we're asking for here. These sample results are additional parameters that you must collect at your effluent. This is to see if those industrial users that you have are passing any of these trace metals through your treatment plant and into the receiving stream. This data will help let us know if you need additional monitoring or limits on your outfall location. So now moving on to Part E of the application is the combined sewer systems. You've heard me say on a few occasions that there's only 9 communities in the state that need to submit this form. Well, here they are. If you're one of these 9, you must submit Part E. If you are not, you do not need to supply Part E with your renewal application. So the form is pretty easy to fill out. It's just a single page. It does require maps, locations, and descriptions of each CSO outfall. So this is another occasion where that Google map or an online map would help out to get those coordinates. It requires information on any CSO events. So if you had any overflow events over the past year, it does ask for duration and if you have an estimated flow. information like that, and then the receiving waters that were affected by that overflow. And finally, the last form of the application is Part F, which is just the certification. It is a signature box, a place to put an email address and a date, and it's just stating that you certify that all the information included in the application is correct to your knowledge. We send this form back all the time because there is a requirement on who can and who cannot sign this form. So the best rule of thumb that I can tell you is that if you are a POTW municipality, have the mayor sign it. If you are a very large municipality and have a whole public works department, then you can have the public works director sign it. But otherwise, default to the mayor, then you know that Part F, the certification requirements are met. If you are privately owned, maybe a mobile home park or campground, things like that, have the owner sign it. If you're an operator for one of those facilities, please don't sign it. Please get it to the owner and have them sign the form. So your application forms are finally complete and you're ready to submit them. So what you need to do is you need to scan those forms and get them into an electronic format and then email them to that email address on the top of the screen. We've gone away from paper forms. You still can submit them in paper, but we do highly recommend and prefer that you submit them through email. Applications are reviewed by DNR staff almost immediately. So if you have a complete application, you will not hear from us. We won't provide you a follow-up. You'll get an automated response from that email address saying thank you for your submittal. But otherwise, if you got a complete application, no news is good news. You won't hear from us until a permit writer picks it up and goes to renew that permit. If you have an incomplete application, you'll receive a follow-up email from us within a week to 2 weeks of you submitting that application, and it will outline the questions that need additional information and provide a due date for completion. And any additional information requested and that due date follows the same enforcement timeline as a late application. So it'll give a due date. If it's not submitted by that date, then you'll receive an LV and so on and so forth. Applications do require an $85 application fee. You'll get an invoice along with your reminder packet. And we have options now for paying that fee. You can pay online, you can call and pay over the phone, or you can mail in a check for that payment. So now you've got your application submitted. We've reviewed it, so you either didn't hear anything from us, which is a good sign, or you heard back from us, but you got us the information that we needed. So now it's on us to get that permit renewed. So permitting priorities, number one is new facilities. This would be facilities that have never had an NPDES permit, but they have a new treatment plant, a new discharge coming. We try to get them a permit by the time they're operational and ready to discharge. Number two is facilities that have upgraded or expanded treatment technologies. So this would be a case where we issued you a permit 5 years ago. Since that time, you've upgraded, and the permit really no longer applies to the treatment that you currently have. If we're able to, we'll get you a new permit as soon as we can. And the third one is facilities that are long expired. We have a few things that lead to permits being on our backlog for several years, which I'll go over next. When those permits come free to be renewed, we'll try to get them renewed. So those delays are, our number one delay is stream designation review. This delay is measured in years and not months. So state law prohibits us from issuing an NPDES permit to a facility if their receiving stream does not have a use sustainability analysis done. So stream designation, UAA, you might hear those used in the same sentence. The stream designations are for rec use or aquatic life, and that's what drives the permit limits. So we cannot issue a permit renewal until that stream designation is done. This list would include a couple hundred permits as of right now. The next delay is the waste load allocation backlog, which is measured in months and not years, thankfully. The waste load allocation is one of the first steps that we need to reissue a permit. It is the document that calculates all the limits. The waste load allocation staff has had a lot of turnover over the last 6 to 12 months, and they're getting those new waste load allocation writers trained up. The third one is if you have upgrades in progress. If you've got a new facility coming online in the next year or two, we might hold off on renewal until that treatment plant is closer to being constructed. And that way, when we do renew it, it's for the new facility and not for your existing facility, which is about to go offline. And our fourth one is, of course, just workload of permit writers. We have 1,000 to 1,200 permits that my group works on, and I have only a few permit writers. So just our work log can cause a delay, but as long as you've got that application submitted on time, then you've done your part. So if you're one of those facilities that has been delayed for years for stream designation delay, use your time wisely. And by that, I mean a lot of those are old enough now where we haven't implemented the new ammonia and E. coli limits that get more stringent. You should be planning upgrades. Reach out to me, ask me, hey, I think my permit stream designation delayed. Can you give me a heads up on what will be required when I get my new permit? And I'll let you know. If you're going to be facing a compliance schedule for ammonia or E. coli upgrades, but you're not going to see your permit in 3 years, then maybe start planning now, whether it just be financial planning, um, or if you do want to get a consultant and start a facility plan, use that time wisely, use it to your benefit. So the next few slides is an oversimplification of our permit renewal process. After we have a permit that we know we can move forward with, our first step is to request a waste load allocation. As I mentioned on the last slide, that could create a delay of a few months, but that document provides all the calculations for the water quality-based effluent limits. Once we have that waste load allocation, we can start adding it to the other information that we have and put your draft permit package together. So we review your application, we review any other monitoring data that we have available to us. So your monthly reports that you submit, we have access to all of that data. So we compare any data from your application and your normal monthly monitoring to the waste load allocation. And that will help us determine where you may need additional limits. If you've got reasonable potential to violate a water quality standard, then we are required by law to put that limit in your permit or a compliance schedule that's associated with that limit. So the draft permit will then have all of your monitoring limits and if a compliance schedule is necessary. And then we create our permit rationale, which includes all of our decision making on what went in your permit and why. And then we'll put your draft permit together in the format that you guys are all familiar with. So once we have the draft permit package all put together, it is ready for the public notice. So this is when we'll send it to you. And we also post it into our WWPI, which is our online noticing database, which satisfies all public notice requirements. So the facility no longer needs to publish in the newspaper or post that public notice around town. It's all taken care of by us. Review your draft permit when you get it. Please read it page by page. Check for anything new. Do you have compliance schedules? Do you have any new parameters that aren't in your current sampling routine that you're going to need to include? Check the flow monitoring locations and make sure that you actually have flow monitoring capabilities at those locations. And then reach out to your permit writer with any questions. I am more than happy to go through your permit with you page by page and answer any question that you have during the public notice period, because that's also the time for you to comment on your permit. If there's anything wrong, you need to send us those comments in writing and we can get them fixed before your final permit goes out. Or if you have any just requests, things you'd like to see, we can talk through all of that during the public notice period. Send any comments to your permit writer before the close of the public comment period. And like I said, you need to submit it in writing, so email works just great. Following the public notice period, it's now time to issue your final NPDES permit package. So depending on if we received any comments during the public notice period, we would put together a response to those comments, whether they were from you or any outside party. If those comments led to changes, we would change your draft permit prior to finalizing. And in the rare case, some comments will lead to substantial changes that would require the permit to be renoticed and start that public notice period over again. Typically that doesn't happen, and your permit would be issued final pretty soon after the public notice period. It's always effective on the first day of a month and is effective for 5 years. Once you receive that new permit, it's time to reach out to the local DNR field office and request your new discharge monitoring report form. Your old form will no longer upload to the system once that final permit is issued. And at that time, you should also notify staff of any changes, and maybe you might need to reach out to your lab and let them know of any changes in your sampling requirements. So we've made it through applications and a high overview of the permit renewal process. There's a decent chance that your permit renewal includes a compliance schedule, or maybe you already have a permit with a compliance schedule in it. I get a lot of phone calls and emails and requests asking for changes to compliance schedules every week, especially since COVID. It's what I spend the most of my time on. So I wanted to make sure that everybody listening has a good idea of what they need to do if they have a compliance schedule. So our standard timelines are listed there. If you get a permit renewal and you have more stringent ammonia limits, you'd get a 52-month schedule. So the timing on these schedules are designed to allow enough time for planning, design, and construction to be up and running at the end of that schedule to meet your more stringent limit. So if you got ammonia, it'll be 52 months. If you have a schedule that has ammonia and E. coli combined, it would still be a 52-month schedule. If it's E. coli only, it's only 36 months, just because it doesn't take as long to design and add on disinfection at the end of a treatment process as it would to replace standard secondary units like you would need to for ammonia. So that's why it's a shorter schedule. If you have a controlled discharge lagoon, we set that schedule for 59 months. And the reason that schedule is longer is because we've been finding that some lagoons can meet the limits with just some general maintenance. So if you remove your solids, check your valving between your lagoons, make sure nothing's leaking, and then have good drawdown practices so you're isolating that final cell when you draw down. We've seen some great improvements in some CDLs, and they've been able to meet the limits without starting a very expensive project. So that schedule's longer to allow that maintenance at the beginning. If it doesn't get them to where they need to be, they still got time at the end to then start designing something. If you have a schedule for incompatible waste, so metals or chloride, it's also a 59-month schedule. And that's because there isn't really treatment out there that you can just design and install. That's identifying where the pollutants are coming from and then establishing a plan to get those removed from your system. So the best advice I could give anybody is to get started right away. If you get a permit that has a compliance schedule, it may seem like a long time, but I promise that final compliance date will creep up on you very quickly. And if you don't get started right away, you're not going to get done in time. Which brings us to needing an extension. So final compliance date extensions must go through public notice. So an extension request should be submitted at least 120 days prior to the final compliance date. That is because we need to have the permit amended and that date changed prior to the date you want changed passing. So that permit has to go through public notice. That's at least 30-day notice time. Plus, depending on what other priorities we have, we may not be able to just drop everything and work on your compliance schedule extension. To be approved for an extension, you must also show that you've been working towards compliance the entire schedule and that whatever delays have occurred have been outside of your control. So you can imagine why lately I've been doing a lot of these because it's hard to just get materials right now. Costs have gone up, so people are asking for more time to apply for more grants, which is acceptable. And yeah, just getting equipment right now is out for months. So there are ways to get longer schedules outside of this as well. So there's also the integrated planning option. So what an integrated plan is that you are doing a project that's much larger than what's just required in your NPDES permit. So the most common one is sewer lining. If people are in the middle of a big sewer lining project and then they get their permit renewal that says, hey, you've got to do ammonia and E. coli upgrades, they can say, hey, I'm spending X million of dollars redoing my sanitary sewer system. We want to see what impact that's going to have before we design a brand new treatment plant. So that's an acceptable option to take, and we can work through the integrated planning process to get that extra time that's needed. The other one is based on affordability. We cannot require you build a new treatment plant that you cannot afford. So we have our disadvantaged communities analysis, which takes into account the income of your community and what the improvements would cause your sewer rates, how much your sewer rates would increase due to the improvements that are required. If that sewer rate would be more than 2% of your median household income, you automatically qualify as disadvantaged and you can get a longer compliance schedule. And there's another matrix there. If it's between 1% and 2%, there's some other things that come into play there before you could get that compliance schedule extension. So otherwise, the thing I want to touch on or key in on, I already mentioned it, but I want to say again, I cannot give an extension if you have not been actively working towards compliance through your entire compliance schedule period. If you come to me and say, I need 3 more years because it took 3 years for us to get started, I can't approve that. And unfortunately, we've even had some communities where they say their mayor or their city council wouldn't approve them to do anything. And still, I can't give a schedule for that because your city council didn't take your schedule seriously. Um, and another thing, I mentioned the CDL schedules and being able to do general maintenance and things first. Make sure that you're getting that done on an expedited schedule. If you decide that you're going to remove sludge and fix valves, but you take 4 years to do it, I can't give you more time at the end of that schedule because you didn't do it in an expedited fashion. So just make sure you're working towards compliance, you're getting started right away, and you're staying busy and you can show the work you've been doing the whole time. And then extension requests towards the end of that schedule then, as long as you get them in on time, so I have enough time to amend your permit, are not that big of a lift. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. I do want to highlight this 50-minute presentation down to under a minute to hit some of the highlights that I want to make sure everybody takes home with them. First thing's applications. If you're working on it and you get confused, step 1 is to read the instructions, see if your answer's in there. Step 2, just call your permit writer. We'll walk through any of the forms you want. We'll make sure we get the correct information. Second thing is your draft permits. When you receive that draft permit, make sure you read it front to back. Make sure everything makes sense. Your outfall locations, your monitoring frequencies, your monitoring locations like for flow. If something doesn't make sense, call your permit writer. We're happy to walk through it page by page until everybody is content. If there's changes that need to be made, the time to make that is while that permit is still in draft. The third thing is compliance schedules. If you get a compliance schedule, get started right away. And if there are things that happen, delays that occur that are outside of your control, make sure you get that extension request in early. Otherwise, I won't be able to have time to amend that schedule. So that is it. I think there's a few minutes now for questions, or if you'd rather, my contact information is there. Please give me a call or send me an email and I can answer any of your questions that way too. Thank you.